My most memorable part of my life is not my Army life. It's that 31 people down there on the river starving to death. Here we come, coming west, and Uncle Henry had come through Fort Worth going to visit Grandma in Oklahoma City, and he talked Papa into moving out to West Texas. So that's how we got out there, but we was in an old Essex. And I'll tell you, you probably never seen an Essex automobile. There's Hudson Essex Motor Company. Hudson made them. Hudson was a good car, and Essex, they wouldn't even run. But we'd have to crank that thing till the water boil, where it'd start, and get it going. Well, the thing would run, just hum like a sewing machine, but the thing was no good. But those old pigs, we'd have to, Papa, we'd go through a town, he'd go to these restaurants and ask them if they had any garbage he wanted them to take care of, and he'd feed it to the pigs, you know. And them pigs made that whole trip. It was about 600 miles out there from Fort Worth, where we went to Fort Quitman. And those old pigs were out along with us all the way. And got out there, he gave them to Uncle Henry. Made Mama so mad she couldn't see straight. She says, "We don't have a thing in the world to eat besides them old catfish you're catching." And says, "Here you are giving our pork away." Which she was right, but I guess Papa was right too. Uncle Henry let us stay there with him till Papa got an old Fort Bellevue. That's the old fort that General Custer built. He built that fort to have a place to keep his troops and train them while he was chasing Pancho Villa, keeping him out of the United States. And trying to, he didn't keep him out entirely. He broke through at Palomas and several places and raided the towns, you know. That old house, the old pole house, it didn't have one window in it, glass. It had the holes there for them. It had the windows, but they weren't glass windows. Mama would stretch old flour sacks or anything she'd get over them, you know, to keep the wind out of them. Wintertime, it'd get so cold in there, dirt floor, and she had a cook stove in the kitchen and dining room is all combined. It was probably as big as a kitchen in there. And Papa built an old table, boards that he got off the fort down there, and built a table, had benches we sat on to eat. And Mama wouldn't cook in that thing because you couldn't get a breath of air in that thing. It had a door leading outside, and Mama had 2 old Dutch ovens, and she did all of her cooking outside year-round. Snow, rain, and all, she cooked. But the good part about it, she didn't have anything cooked anyway. But she'd always had flour to cook bread, and she'd mix up that dough and pour it in old Dutch ovens about that thick, that big around, and that's how it'd come out. That thick and that big around. Sometimes it'd be so hard you could hardly eat it, but she a lot of times wouldn't have seasoning lard put in it, you know. It'd be pretty tough and pretty well burned, but we'd eat it. Eat it with our fish or rabbit, whatever we happened to have. Venison, a lot of times we'd poach deer, and we didn't think anything about it. We got hungry, we went up in the mountains and killed deer, and we didn't care if it was a buck, doe, or a fawn. We'd kill that gentleman, take it down there and eat it. We had to. And I think the roof was, all of our roofs was dirt, about old adobe dirt about a foot thick on top of cochinilla bushes, which is small and real straight and real long. Some of them get 12 feet long. And we'd lay them up on there and then pile that dirt on top of them and wet it, and then pile dirt on top of that wet mud and get it a foot thick for a roof. And they wouldn't leak. Well, once in a while we'd have to re-dirt it, but The floor was dirt, you know. There's a big old, great, huge arroyo come in right north of our house, about 100 yards, I guess. And Papa built an old sled. He took a couple of trees and slanted them off, made runners, you know, and built logs across them this way. And we had an old metal barrel, gasoline barrel it was to start with. And we'd put that on that sled, we called it, with team mules, and drive out on a gravel bar as far as it'd go without floating it off, and start dipping water and fill that thing up with river water and take it to the house. And during the fall and summer of the year when it was raining a lot, not a lot, but raining, the old river stayed muddy. It was up so much at the time, you know, from runoff. And Mama would have to let that water settle, and sometimes it'd take it a day or two to settle down, to let the mud all go to the bottom before she could get water out to wash or cook or anything else. But yeah, that's the only water we had. And for bathing, we bathed in a river all together. Now, Mama and Gertrude, they bathed in a wash tub in the house, but us boys, we always bathed in a river. And we had a thing going. New Year's Day, we went in the river whether it was snowing or what. That was a thing as our New Year's thing to celebrate. Swim across the river. Big deal to us, you know. It wasn't a good life. And we never thought anything about it, really. Time, why, deer season rolled along, and I went deer hunting, and old Dodge Hammett was the mail carrier. He carried the mail every Friday. He had an old Model T Touring, and he'd go all the way to McNairy and back, 40 miles, pick up the mail and come back down and distribute it along. Maybe there'd be a letter to drop off every 4 or 5 miles. You know, somebody might live close enough that they had a box down on the road trail, rather. But I'll tell you. But anyway, he was making a mail run that day, and he had been up in the mountains hunting, and he had to come back down. He'd got up awful early, horseback, rode up hunting deer, and he was going back to get his car to make his mail run, and we were going out to hunt, me and Euless. Euless had a horse, I didn't. And I had no horse, but he's always busy plowing or something. But anyway, Dodge says, "Why don't you take this little horse?" Says, "He needs riding." Says, he's pretty well broke. Says, "Don't let him get his head down or he'll buck with you." And I told him, all right, I could handle him, I thought. So I had a horse too with Euless, so we went hunting, deer hunting. And we was about 12 miles, I guess, from home. And there's a little old mound stuck up out there, and them mountains was right at the very foot of the Quitman Mountains. And they were rough boogers. They're solid rock, practically. But anyway, I wanted to ride up that little mountain so I could overlook the country. And Euless was about a half mile from me, I guess. We kept in sight of each other, pretty much as we could. But I couldn't get this horse to go up that mound. And I said, well, there's bound to be something up there. So I just got off and tied him and walked up there, and there's a lot of those old soapweeds. You know what soapweeds are? Well, they're yuccas. Okay. Big old yucca up there, big enough to make a shade that a man could lay down in. And this guy was there by the this yucca, and I don't know how they determined it, but the coroner decided that that guy had laid down in the shade of that yucca. Now, how he determined that, I don't know. Well, maybe by looking at maybe acid and blood or stuff. I don't know how, but anyway, that was the determination he made. It he laid down there and died. But I got up there and I found him. I just took my old hat off, and first time I caught Ulysses, I waved him come over, and so he came over, and he rode right on up there on his horse. His horse was gentle. That thing I had, every time I'd spur him, try to get him up there, why, he'd start pitching with me. So I just tied him down there. But anyway, my Aunt Myrtle, that's my father's brother's wife, Uncle Leonard's wife. She was down there on the river too, of course. She was one of the 31, and she's scared of her shadow. You couldn't get her out of that house at night. Uncle Leonard would have to carry a bucket in for her pee in, and have to take it out and dump it, and because she wouldn't go out to the door. Didn't have any toilets anyway. Didn't have any toilets. When we was in a stick house, it's just automatically when the men come out, they would turn right and go to that big wash I told you about. It was right there close to the house. And time it'd rain again, well, we'd have that thing pretty well ready to flush out. And, and it'd get flushed from the rain, you know. But the women would turn to the left and go back into the brush, which was right there by the house, all around the house. But that's the way our toilets were arranged. We didn't have any toilets. But anyway, he came over and he says, "You know how scared Myrtle is?" Says, "Let's take that head down there and scare her with it." I said, "All right." So I says, I don't know how if I can get it off her or not. He was partly decaying. Fact of the matter, before we started pulling his head off, why, he had a belt on and it had a gutta percha. You know what that is? Seashells, I think. But anyway, it looked like pearl and this and that and the other, you know. It had a letter N on it. I thought that was the prettiest thing. N, Norris. Get the connection? So I reached down and got a hold of it, was going to unbuckle it and take it off of it, and the whole thing just split right in two and back where he'd been laying on it. And the body acids had rotted it in two. And, well, now he had died in the summertime. We found out later, the exact date even. But this was fall, the hunting season. And but anyway, I took the belt buckle and I went through his pockets and I got a 50-cent piece and a dime and 2 pennies, I believe it was. And he didn't have a billfold on him. So he didn't even have a pocket knife, which I'm surprised. I looked for his pocket knife. But anyway, well, I just put that in my pocket and grabbed a hold of him by each side of his head, by his ears, and started twisting. And I get that thing over so far and it wouldn't twist any farther. It'd hang up on me and spring back if I turned it loose. It'd go back quite a ways. And I made 3 or 4 twists on him, couldn't get him. So I said, "You're going to have to cut them cords that's holding there." It had these cords, I don't know what it was on each side, but anyway, it was pretty strong and it's in pretty good shape at the time. They'd hang up. So he took my pocket knife and I twisted him around there, and then he cut them cords loose and the head come loose in. And we had his head. And I said, "I can't get that thing close to my horse. You're going to have to carry him." He says, "All right." So he tied him on his saddle. We took him down to the river. And we was having a lot of fun with him down there for 3 or 4 days. And finally got tired of playing with him, I guess. And Uncle Leonard got tired of scaring Aunt Myrtle with her. So there's a gate out there in front of Uncle Henry's house. The gate was about just about 100 yards from the house that lets you into a yard, which is about 5 acres. And is around, the fence was around there to keep the stock from coming up in the yard, you know, at night and so forth. But anyway, we took that head out there, and the gate post where it had been chopped in two had a point on it. And we took that thing and crammed him right down over that point. And there he was, you know, just overlooking the world. And mind you, we never had anybody down there on that place. Nobody will ever come down there. Bless your life, it wasn't but just a day or two after we put that head out there on the gate till a guy come along. He was lost. He was a prospector. He was lost. Said, I saw that road leading down there. I knew there's a house down here. Seen the smoke. So I come down here. It's about a mile from the gate where he saw the smoke. So he come down there and won't know where he was. And so he said, by the way, he says, what gives with that head out there? Oh, that head, we got him up in the mountain. We found him up there. So we got his head and brought it down here. We thought it was funny. We didn't think anything about it. He's dead. You know, as far as we're concerned, he's done. So, I guess it was a week later, here the sheriff come down there. This guy had gone back to Sierra Blanca and told the sheriff about it. And here old Milam Wright come. I knew Milam Wright well. He knew me, everything. He'd been to our ball games and everything, you know, baseball. And but anyway, he saw the head out there when he drove up. Here he comes. And he knew I was the one that twisted it off, because the guy described him to him, and he won't talk to me. So I told, yeah, we found him. Says he's in pretty good shape too, isn't he? We're proud of him. He says, yeah, but let me tell you something. That's against the law. He's dead. He says, don't make any difference. He is dead. You don't twist his head off. He says, can you find where he was? I said, sure. He says, well, I got to take you with me then. So he says, get Euless. That's the guy who's with me, my cousin, my dad's cousin, my second cousin. So I got Euless. He had a guy with him, a deputy sheriff with him. And we got up there, and I think he was sorry he went up there after we got as far as we could in the car and he had to walk. But anyway, we walked on over there to where the body was, still there, of course. And he had a leg gone from the knee down. Animals had done it, you know, after we'd got that blood, I guess, smell it. I don't know, but anyway, they said the animals drug it off down the hill. They found it. And this deputy had a big old black bag just for bodies, a body bag they called it. And they put him in that, and he says, but I want you to know one thing. You don't go around twisting people's heads off. And that's when he pointed his finger at me. That finger looked like it was that big around, I'll tell you, it sure did. And I'll never forget it either. And I'll tell you, I told him I wouldn't, and I haven't. And I haven't twisted anybody else's heads off. But you know another funny thing? Now this is hard to believe nowadays, but we had a yearling cross the river, and Euless Lincoln went over to get him. Is a little bull, and I'm sure he smelled a cow over or something, but anyway, they smell them 5 miles away, you know, if they're in heat. But anyway, he went over there, and they went over and got him, brought him back. The next time they went over to get him, why, the fiscales, the Mexican immigration, picked them up, took him up to a little town. Now this was about 3 hours horseback ride. They rode up there to this town, took him up there, put him in jail, and the judge says, no, he says, you people got to be neighbors down there. Says, I'm not going to put him in jail. Says, give him their stock. Says, and you guys try to told Lincoln. And Euless says, y'all put a yoke on him or something to keep him from crossing. Said, and then that way you'll all be peaceful again. So they come on back down there, but Lincoln got it in for that Mexican that picked him up. And there's a trail run down the Mexican side, and many a day during the Mexican Revolution, Lincoln and I would find us a place where we could look down on that trail and watch the Mexican army pass, pulling these old trailers, cannons, you know, two-wheel cannons, and they'd flop around behind them little old mules, pulling them. Half time they'd turn over and they'd set them back up, the way they'd go again. And all that passed for, sometimes it'd be 4 or 5 hours passing. And we'd go down there and watch them. And they had a pretty good trail beat out on their side. It had ruts, you could get a wagon through it. But in fact, they pulled them old cannons through there. But every day there for, I guess 2 or 3 months. Well, every minute Lincoln get spare time, he'd go down to what we call Box Canyon. It's where the river pinched in, formed a box through there. And this road run right along the water's edge, and then out of it again, back up on the bank where it wasn't closed in, so didn't make a box there, closed in. But he'd go down there and he'd take an old army rifle down there and lay and wait for that guy to pass. He's going to shoot him. And many a day I've gone down there with him, knowing that he's going to kill that guy. And he says, I'll just shoot him and leave him lay right where he is. Says, anybody treat us like that? It's as good as we've been to hire them, you know, to work on the farm and all, do ranch work and everything else. And I'd go down there and we'd get down there and talk real quiet, you know. There's sort of a cave on our side, on the high side. And we'd get back in that cave and where we could see anything coming or anything, wait for that guy to come by. And whether I was long or not, he'd go down there and wait for him. And I'd say, where you been, Lincoln? He'd all been out just looking around. I knew where he'd been, and he'd tell me, but he'd just say that. But anyway, one day he quit going down there. And I mentioned to him, I says, well, you going down today to look around? I'll go with you. He always wanted me to go with him when I could. I couldn't go all the time. And he'd go by himself, but he says, no, says, there's no need of going down there anymore. I says, did you kill him? He says, now I wouldn't go that far to say I killed him, but says, he's not going to come by anymore. I know he killed him. I never tell anybody that. I never tell anybody that. Oh, I could throw a good curve. I could throw a roundhouse curve, or I could throw a fast break and throw a good drop. That was my main strikeout. A lot of games I'd get 10, 12 strikeouts a game. But you got to remember, I was pitching against them old country boys. It wasn't ball players. You know what I mean? And I can look back on it. I wasn't half good as I thought I was, I guess. But old Red Wilson come out there. He'd look at me every year. Well, you haven't grown a pound. He was a White Sox scout, and I never did know who it was scouted me from the University of Texas. But I got this letter from him, wanting me to report for a physical for a scholarship, and I thought that was the greatest thing that ever was. Well, University of Texas offered me a scholarship, and I had to go down there and take a physical. I didn't have money to go down there and take it. I never did go down there. So I went to school when R.E. Thompson come along, the representative from our district, and he found out that about this, me being offered this scholarship, and he tried to get it and then it been filled. So he got me to go to University of Kentucky and take an engineering course. By then, I was working for the Boundary Commission. I'd finished high school, and was ready for college or ready for work. Well, I took work, of course. So I started work for the International Boundary Commission, the Mexico section. And old R.E. Thompson was our state representative, and he found about it. And so he looked me up and come talk to him and asked me if I'd go to a college that he was sure he could get me into Kentucky and take a course in geodesy, which is, I want to go to work for the Coast Geodetic Survey. And so I told him, yeah, I'd go anywhere I could. So he got me in down there. And after I got out of that, well, I had a job with the U.S. Coast Geodetic Survey, and I worked the 7 western states. I was the youngest chief of party that the Coast Geodetic ever.
What did you do?
Well, they accepted me in grade, which was Rodman. The Coast Geodetic Survey did. And they accepted all my sick leave and annual leave that I had built up. Everything, just transferred everything over intact, which is very, very unusual. Usually you took your sick leave and annual leave, and then you start work for a different division, but they needed men, and it's a traveling job, and of course there's a lot of men that take the job, but there's so many of them didn't even know what the word geodesy was. You know what I mean? I had this training there in school, you know, and then too, all I had been doing was surveying on a survey crew, and I had got to the point where they used me running instrument most of the time, and I was much up on that, and I studied geodesy there at college, and when I transferred over, why, I didn't work but about 6 months before the guy that was chief party transferred to a ship. He went out on a ship. We were sounding the ocean 12 miles offshore, all the way around the United States where we had coast. And they'd go on a ship with that old, they call it a chain, it was a cord really, and it had little balls on it every 5 feet, lead balls, to sink it. And they'd throw that thing out and let it sink down to the bottom. Well, we're a certain distance off the coast, the water's this deep. And they'd go a couple 100 yards farther, meters, same thing. And that's work, you know. And he took over a ship. I forgot the name of the boat now, I did know it. But anyway, he started running that, and they gave me the party. And I was the youngest party chief that they'd ever had. And I guess still am the youngest they ever had, because everything was getting into a war at that time, you know. England was already at war, France with Germany, you know, and all of them. But anyway, why, I started work for them, and they put me to running the first job I had was running the mean sea level of the Pacific Ocean along the the United States shoreline, California, Oregon, and Washington. And that was months and months. And I'd work down in California, and sometime I got to work in Arizona a little bit, and Nevada, but my main project was a sea level, to establish a sea level, and that was quite a chore, you know, and that meant we had to walk all the way along the coast level with our instrumentation and back, because it's first order work. That means it's you run it and then you come back and check it. And it's got to check within a certain amount, or you do that section over. And boy, I soon learned not to take any chances on an error. But anyway, well, that's what I did. for the first couple of years, and after that was finished, why, you know how they do that? I'll tell you a little reason I'm mentioning this. There's a funny little story in there that I want to tell you. When we was running that, why, every creek it run in, or every river, every inlet where the tide would reach and back up water, you know, in them, like the rivers it does and so forth, why, we'd have to go up that till where we figured was about the end of the tide, and we'd set a float station there to float. It had a float in it, it'd go up and down, it had a chart and it would mark it, how high it would go this day and that day and so forth. And we didn't care how high it was, we just wanted to know how high it was, but not necessarily the figure it was. You see what I mean? And then we'd have to run elevation up there and then tie the chart into the elevation that we would run up there with instruments. And I was all walking, peeping. And that old theodolite weighed 65 pounds. And I'd pack that thing, well, the umbrella man would usually carry it. I had an umbrella man and 2 rodmen and a truck driver. And the rodmen, of course, they took care of the rod. They carried a 2-pound sledgehammer to drive the pins in the ground to set the rod on to turn it so it'd be accurate, you know. And I'd walk around them, shoot them, and then shoot the other rodman, and then I'd walk around them, you know. Just all day is just like this, walking. And we'd run up there to these floats that they set and put an elevation on them, come back and go on up to another river, another creek or something, do the same thing. And you can see how long it would take to do stuff like that. But after that was finished, why, they gave me the project of running elevation top of Mount Whitney. They did that every 5 years. And that was turning with the rods and instruments. And now they just take a aneroid instrument up there, sit down there and get the air pressure and get the elevation. And they're so accurate now. They got them things where they're right on. And Mount Whitney was sinking about 1/10 of a meter every year. And if they had an earthquake out there, why, sometimes it would sink 1/2 meter. And they were keeping up with it every 5 years. They'd take this sea. And it come my time to take it, so that's what I was doing. I was surveying for the Coast Geodetic Survey, and at that particular time, I was running the mean sea level, establishing the mean sea level, and we'd stay in one town 30 days or less. If I didn't move every 30 days, I'd lose my per diem. So I'd always move. We moved into a little town of Etna, and there was a ice cream parlor there, and we'd always stay in rooming houses and boarding houses where we could eat there, you know, and sleep and everything, same place. And there'd only be 5 of us, so we'd always stay in the same house, usually, most always. But anyway, we was staying there at this place, and across the street there, and this Etna's little old mountain town, and I mean it's up in the mountains. Prettiest little setting you ever seen for a town. And has a fountain that run out on the street. Day and night it would run. And in wintertime, that fountain would get, 8 feet tall, water coming out and keep freezing, you know. And it's coming off the mountain. I don't know how they had it piped into it, but anyway, it'd get down there as water and turn to ice. But we had, this was summertime though, when we were in there, when I met Dorothy. And they had a little ice cream parlor there, across the street from our boarding house. And every night we'd go over there and we'd play those what do you call them? Music machines. Yeah. And at that time, the popular tunes were all those waltzes and stuff like that. And that's we'd just play them over and over and over, the same ones, you know. And this woman that owned this ice cream parlor had 2 daughters that was our ages. My crew was, all of them was older than me, but they were still about their age, you know. And they run that parlor, and they gave a watermelon bust and then invited us to go along. And so they said, there's a lady here in town, she's a school teacher. Says, we're going to invite her too. Says, y'all care? Says, no, we didn't care who would have been invited. More the merrier. So I took the old company truck, and it was nothing but an old commercial rig, a 1.5 ton truck with wire sides and curtains rolled up and down. And part of the crew would have to ride back there, you know, so it had curtains on it. But we hauled our instruments and stuff back there, and rods on top, of course. I got pictures of it. It wasn't a very nice looking truck, an old Chevy truck. But anyway, they had a lot of outsiders that went, so I told them I would take the truck and haul a survey party out there and that, which I did. And we got out there, this is an old mill pond. And in case anybody don't know what that is, it's an old pond where they had been a sawmill there, and they'd keep these logs soaking in that sawmill to take them up and dump them in that sawmill, soak till they sawed them up, keep them from warping and stuff. But anyway, the banks to the thing was just almost straight up and down, and people were playing around there, cutting up. Some of them were throwing the others in. All of them had on bathing suits, and my party all had on their bathing suits. Dorothy had on a bathing suit, and she was the woman that they had invited to go along. And I don't know how we got together there, but anyway, I was going to throw her in that mill pond, and we just got to playing back and forth, you know, and wound up back away from the mill pond, talking about each other, you know, getting acquainted. And when we rode back to town, well, she rode back to town with my crew in the cab with me and the driver. And so next day, I got a phone call after I got home from work inviting me down to play croquet. She asked me if I played croquet, and I told her I had played, but I wasn't good at it. She says, well, my dad wants to play you some croquet. Says, and Mama's going to cook a chicken. Says, we've already got it worked up, but you come down and have dinner with us and play croquet with Dad. So, all right, so I went down there. It's only a couple blocks from where we live, little town anyway. And he was superintendent of the county schools there. And of course, her mother at that time had retired from nursing long years before. But anyway, we had chicken dinner, and we played croquet around her, and I found out her dad didn't even know how to play. I beat him so bad, I was ashamed of myself after I did it. But it got where he'd invite me down, but he wouldn't play croquet with me. But anyway, that's how I got acquainted with Dorothy. And we made a trip or two into Wairika, which is about 25 miles from Etna, where we were staying. And that's where Dorothy later, well, they had that place there at the time, but they're staying over in the mountains where it's cool. But I got to know her, and we got to visiting back and forth on the phone wherever I'd go. We'd call and talk, And she come to visit me a time or two at different places I was, you know. And I said, what do you tell your folks when you come to visit me? I says, I tell them I'll go to see you. And she says, what do they say? They don't say anything. I'm 21. And so anyway, we got acquainted like that, and we visited long distance for about 4 or 5 years. But anyway, while I was there, I got orders to go out to Fort Huachuca in Arizona. And that's a pretty good little hike across there, you know. And so she caught the same train I did. And when we got to El Paso, my folks, I had phoned them and told them that I'd be in El Paso a certain time, but the train is only going to stop there a couple hours. And like for them to come over to see me, Dorothy was with me. So they came up here and met us, and we went to dinner. And the trains then, they were just loaded. A civilian just had a hard time getting on a train anywhere during that time. But anyway, they loaded us right on, of course, and I had a room all by myself. And I had rank. And at that time, I was a tech sergeant. I hadn't made master. No, I was a tech sergeant. But anyway, I had a room by myself. There was no officer ever with me on these survey trips. But anyway, Dorothy, she was out there with her suitcase, wanting on that train. And a conductor, he was there, said, all right, y'all get on. And he says, this lady over here in a white hat, you get on. Dorothy had on the white hat. So she got on. I didn't know it. So the next morning, about daylight, one of my crew had got up and come up out of my room where I was, and he'd been back to the diner to get him a cup of coffee. And he come up, knocked on my door, and I hollered, come in. He come in. There's one of the guys that I had with me. He says, Sarge, did you know Dorothy's on this train? I says, no. So you got to be kidding. He says, no, she's not. No, I'm not kidding. Says, she's back there. Nothing on that coach but coons. Says, that's all they are. Said, she's the only white person in that coach. And there I was with a room, full bed in there by myself. You know, she could have been up there with me. But anyway, I went back there where she was, and got her, took her up there to my coach, and by then was getting into Arizona. We left El Paso and was coming on out to Fort Huachuca. And I says, well, why didn't you tell the conductor something to look me up? She says, well, I didn't want to bother you. I says, wouldn't have been any bother. I said, good Lord, this is awful. She says, well, they didn't bother me. I says, well, that's good. But anyway, we got into Fort Huachuca. We got off. They had Army vehicles there to pick us up, see, and our equipment, survey equipment. And there Dorothy was standing out there all alone. And at that time, the train didn't run to Fort Huachuca. It ran to Bisbee Junction and was a stop, run by there, you know. And that was about, it's about 12 miles, isn't it, out of Fort Huachuca, something like that. But anyway, she went over and there's a taxi there. She said, are you going to Fort Huachuca? He says, sure am. And she looked, and his cab was full of blacks, nigger soldiers coming back, you know, to camp. And she says, well, how can I get out there? He says, well, I'll make room for you with me. He says, we'll put one of those guys in the back, and you can ride up front with me if you want to. And she said, all right. And so and this was a colored guy too, the driver, cab driver, was a colored guy, and the guy that she had to sit next between him and the driver was a black soldier. So she sat between them. She asked the driver, she says, how big is Fort Huachuca? Says, oh, I don't know. It's got several thousand troops out there. She says, it's got two divisions. There's the Rainbow Division and the old Hat in the Ring Division, Buffalo Division. And she said, no, the town. She says, town? There ain't no town. She says, well, there's bound to be a town, isn't there? And that guy says, no, there's no town. She says, good Lord, is there any hotels there? She says, no, there's no hotels there. She says, that's all a black camp. Said, there is a black USO there. Said, you might can stay in there till a bus comes by or something. Says, I don't know when buses run, but there's 2 or 3 a day, I think, runs. So she got off while she asked somebody there, and they says, no, there ain't no place to stay here. Says, you can go over to that USO. Says, they're open 24 hours a day, and stay in there till bus comes along. If you want to wait till bus take you out of here. So she went over to USO and went in there, and this gal came over to a white girl, and she says, called her Girlie, says, Girlie, you look sort of lonesome. Says, can I join you? And Dorothy's glad to have company, you know, white company. And so she says, I'm waiting for my cousin. He gets off at 5. He'll be down here at 5. Says, we'll dance a while. And says, just stay close to me. Says, you'll be all right. Says, these guys won't bother you. So she stayed pretty close to her all day till 5 o'clock. Here come her cousin. He was black as ink. And coming to find out, she was a high yellow. You could look at her features and tell she was black, but her skin you couldn't. You know what I mean? And she had the thick lips, you know, and the black eyes and all that stuff. She's strictly black. But anyway, Dorothy was scared to death. And so she talked to the guy that was in charge of the outfit, and he says, well, do you know where this guy is that you're looking for with? Says, no, but he's got 5 white guys with him, a survey party. They're going to do some surveying here. And he says, well, I know where they're staying. They always put the white people in a certain barracks out there. He says, I'll get a guy to run up there and tell him you're here. Don't have any phone or anything to reach him. So he got this guy, and it starts storming. And you know where Fort Huachuca is, a pretty mountain. And when it thunders, it just really lets loose. And it come up a big thunderstorm, lightning around, and it starts sprinkling a little bit. And that guy, he didn't get no farther than to the gate going into the post. And here he come running back down there and says, I'm not going out there. There's lightnings out there. Lightnings out there. So he wouldn't go. So he couldn't get anybody else to go. It had started raining pretty hard then. So she says, well, he says, why don't you go over in this restroom, this ladies' restroom, says, and go in there and says, there's a cot in there, stretch out on that, says, put your suitcase against the door or something, and says, you'll be all right there. They won't nobody bother you. Says, that's a women's restroom. These men won't go in there. They know they'll be court-martialed. So she stayed all night in that restroom there at that USO show. The next morning, they got a guy to come up here and tell me that she was there. So I took off down there where she was. And if I remember right, when I got down there, it was about 9 o'clock, I'll say. And she had already found out the bus schedule out. And she says, there's a bus out at 10, and there's one out at 1, 1 and 3. Every 2 hours there's a bus out. And she says, I'll catch that one out at 6 tonight, and we'll get to visit today. I says, you'll catch the first one out of here. So I stayed there, that first bus come along, and I made dead sure she was on that thing, headed for Wairika and home. But that was her experience of the colored USO. Well, I was in the Army, and we had been talking about getting married, and I finally told her, I says, I can't get married now. I've got 2 siblings at home I got to feed, and my parents. My dad's getting old, he's sick. He's not only got heart trouble, but he only has 1 lung, and he's always having strokes, and I got to feed them. And all the time I was with the Coast Survey, I'd get my check and cash it, and I'd get a money order for home, and I'd keep just enough to buy me shaving cream and what I might think I might need, and maybe $3 to keep to bowl or go to a show or something with for next payday. We got paid every 2 weeks. And I'd send the rest home to the family, and they could well use it. And at that time I was making good money. I was making $135 a month, and that was good money. And they was lined up for jobs like that. There's no jobs like that, you know. But anyway, I told her we couldn't get married. Happy with it. But anyway, I had written, my folks told Mom and Papa that I was going to be home, that I was on my way to Japan. They'd already told me that they needed a survey crew that knew control work real well to go to Japan, that they was going to enter Japan right away. And I had 30 days in the States to get my equipment repaired or fixed or new equipment or whatever I needed. And I was going right on to Japan. And I could take any 5 men that I wanted to pick to go with me that I knew. So I told her that I'd be home 30 days. Well, she didn't do anything but write Dorothy, or phoned her, I don't remember which now, but anyway, she told her I was going to be home 30 days to come down. Well, when I got home there, Dorothy was. So we started talking about getting married again, and Mama, Papa, they was talking about us getting married. And I'd already told her I couldn't marry on account of them, you know. And they said, oh, you go ahead and get married. So I made sure that there was plumbing in the house. They had no plumbing in it. And I bought Mama a living room suit. I mean a dining room set and everything, so she'd have little stuff, you know, looked halfway decent. In fact, I think Dorothy went with Mama to pick the dining room set out. And but when I told Dorothy I couldn't get married, she says, yeah, we can. Says, we'll take care of her. Says, I'll help. Says, I'll get a job teaching. I can get a job anywhere. And she could. Beat anything I ever seen. I don't know what happened to the teachers long about that time, but they were in demand. And so I finally told her, all right, we'll get married if you'll help me, but you're going to have to help. She says, don't worry. And she did, all through our marriage. If Dorothy bought something for our house, she bought something for Mama's house. Carpeting, curtains, towels, sheets, whatever. If we got one, she got one too. Washing machine. Even got her a deep freeze. And all that stuff, you know. She kept her word, I'll tell you, and more. But anyway, we got up the next morning and we decided that night that, well, we'd go ahead and get married. So we packed our little suitcases and walked us about 3 blocks down to Highway 80, and the bus stop was a drugstore there, but it wasn't open. So we went down there, and I don't know, the bus come by real early. We knew when it'd be there. So we was down there, standing there on the side of the highway with our suitcases. He pulled over and we got on a bus, and away we went. And we got up there and went down to get married at the courthouse. And this county clerk that issued us the license says, well, I'll go ahead and issue your license, but says you can't marry without a physical. Says you got to be checked for all kind of what do you call it, communicable diseases and stuff before you can get married in Texas, especially if you're Army. And this doctor looked at him and says, what do you mean? I was a master sergeant at that time. Says, have you looked at his arms? Says, those are rank stripes. Says, he don't even have to take an exam in the Army. Says, unless he wants to. Says, give the man a okay certificate. So he wrote me out a all clear sign, and I took it, and we went back over to the courthouse, walking about 4 or 5 blocks from the doctor's office back over there. And we went over there, and, well, it didn't take you long to get an exam, did it? Nope. So went in there to get married, and an old judge named Winfield, old Judge Winfield, married us. And I thought he's never going to get us married. He wanted to talk about the war, you know, and what's this like? What's this like? What do y'all do there? What do you eat? And all that, everything. And I finally asked him, I said, well, when are we going to get married? Well, in a power invested in me, I'll pronounce you man and wife. And we got married right that instant then, you know. I was a T4, and I was in charge of a survey party, but all we were doing was practicing. And I was supposed to be teaching these guys. And rank pays when you're in the Army, because them guys, you know, a lot of them some of them would say, oh Lord, we went over that yesterday. What are you doing this again for? We know that stuff. All I had to do is say, listen, let me tell you something. You listen to this and you listen good, or I'll have you in the infantry tomorrow. Boy, they'd listen, they'd pay attention. You know what I mean. But I got in trouble out there on the desert with this colonel. He was the battalion commander. And what happened was, you got that thing done?
Yeah.
What happened, we was out there taking desert training, and I don't know, I guess they was going to send us to North Africa, you know, and a campaign down there. But anyway, well, we were taking desert training, and I had this party, and I had responsibility of these men, you know, for their lives of living even, you know. You got to take care of them. If they're under you, you got to watch out for them. But anyway, we got a shipment of M1 rifles in. We've been training with those old 03 Springfields, which is the old bolt action, you know. And we got those M1s, which are semi-automatic. And they told us, says, we don't have a place to put them, so get a tent up there big enough to hold a shipment of guns for the whole company, and they'll be in racks, so it's going to take quite a little bit of space. So I had to put up a tent about 3 times as big as this room, I guess. And we put it in, and they says, well, says, you're sergeant of the guard, says, we'll just leave you here with this bunch, and you'll be on guard till you're relieved by another crew. And so we put up another little tent there as my headquarters, and I had 4 guys two of them would be walking guard, and two of them would be resting. And that went on around the clock, see. And we'd been out there just about all night, and it was hot. Well, we was at Indio, just out of Indio, about 10 miles. It was so hot up there, you could hardly breathe. But anyway, I told the guys, I says, and now mind you, I had these guys on that tent. It was about my tent was about, it was 12 by 12 is what it was, and I would sit inside that thing and burn up, or else I'd sit out in front of it in the sun, and I'd have to have one of these guards walk around this way, and the other way around that tent, get around there and do a military about face, and come back around there, do a military about face, and go back around it. You know, that's not fun out there in that sun. And the thing of it was, with me, the shipment didn't come in. It'd been held up in Indio, which is about 20 miles from where the camp was. But anyway, the old company commander, can't think of his name now, Colonel. Anyway, he came down there, and he said he's just looking around, and he says, isn't this a guard post? I told him, yeah. And he says, well, where's your guards? I says, they're in a tent there, back and back, with the walls rolled up, trying to stay alive. It's so hot. They just stand out there in the sun, walk around there, and there's nothing in there to guard. So I just told them, go in there and take it easy. He says, well, they're just privates, aren't they? And I says, yeah, they're just privates. He says, well, get them back on duty. I says, well, you're just a colonel, aren't you? And he says, what's your name, Sergeant? And he didn't have a pencil, and I had one. I said, you want to borrow my pencil? So he took it and said, what's your name? And he wrote my name down with my pencil. And boy, he left. He was in a huff. And I told him he was just a colonel. He was a full colonel, too. And so he left in, I guess it's about 3 minutes while the company sergeant major come down there, battalion sergeant major, and he says, what'd you say to the old man? I said, do you mean Colonel so-and-so, and called him by name, you know? I knew there's something in the air. He said, yeah, you know who I mean, the old man. That's what they call the big shots, you know, in your division. So I told him word for word what happened. And this sergeant major, we were good friends. I knew him real well. And in fact, we would go on leave together to towns and passes, you know, go to pass, go in and eat or something. And he says, Al, you don't talk to colonels like that. I says, yes, I do. He says, well, did you know he's going to break you? I said, I don't care. He's still just a colonel to me. He's not a lord. And he says, yeah, but he's over you. I says, I'm over them guys too. But I don't lord it around over them. He says, I know you're not that kind. I says, that's right. He says, but he's going to push you. You can look forward to it. So when I went back off of duty, there was a bunch around the billboard out company area. I knew what they was looking at. Sergeant Norris had been demoted to private first class. And I looked at it, them guys looked at it, and I was sort of laughing. I said, how can you laugh about that? I says, it was sort of funny. He says, boy, I wouldn't say that to that old guy. Says, he's strictly military from the bottom up. If he passed an ant, he thought that ant ought to salute to him. He'd stand there and he did. And I says, well, he found one's not that way. And I told him about him borrowing my pencil to write my name down, and he was shaking so he could hardly write. Now that's how much on the ball he was. Let something like that upset him, you know. And when he got ready to leave, I didn't salute him. He kept standing there waiting for me to salute him. And I didn't, so he finally just wheeled and took off in almost a trot. Went back to the office writing up the order. But anyway, I had gone to St. Louis, Missouri, and picked up a theodolite. And there's a general up there issued it to me. Had to be issued by a general. And he says, now whatever you do, don't let anybody talk you into borrowing this. He says, that's assigned to you, and I'm going to hold you responsible for it. I says, well, you're going to get it back from me. He says, that's the way it's got to be. I says, all right. So the next day, the company commander come along, says, you guys ready to go to work? I says, yeah, what do you want me to do today? He says, well, the same thing you've been doing, run this party. I says, I'm not running that party. He broke me way below that. I'm about 3 steps down from that, running a party business. I says, I guess I could rod, tote a rod around, but I'm not doing that work above my rank. And he says, well, we got to have somebody to run that party. I says, well, it's not going to be me. So he says, well, this is, and I kept the theodolite under my cot in my tent at night so nobody could get it, you know. And he says, well, we'll have to take that theodolite. And I says, no, you don't get that. I've got written orders not to give that to anybody. If you want to see them, I've got them here. He says, no, I believe you. And so it wasn't very long till here the old colonel was down there. And he says, I understand that you don't want to run the party. I says, why no, would you? Would you want to run this battalion if you was demoted? He said, well, we're not talking about me, we're talking about you. I says, no, you wouldn't, Colonel, you wouldn't run this if it'd take your rank away from you. And I says, I'm not running this party. He says, well, they say you won't release the theodolite that we borrowed from whatever it was. I forgot who had it now. They only had 2 of them in the United States. And so he says, I understand you won't release that. I says, no. I said, I've got a written permit to keep that. And I showed it to him. Boy, he read that thing and handed it to me, and he took back for the office. And a little bit, well, here come the sergeant major back, this friend of mine, come back down there. He says, well, I got something put on the bulletin board. And I says, well, put it up there. What's he doing, put me in a brig? He says, no, you've been promoted. And he gave me a rank higher than I was. Yeah, when we went left Paris going to the front, which was in Germany, we went into a little town called Worms, W-O-R-M-E-S, W-O-R-M-S, just plain old Worms. And there was a American contingent there on rear guard, and we had taken off our uniforms in Paris and put on our fatigues. We was ready to go to war, whatever. We got up there, and they informed us that we couldn't go up there like that. We had to have our uniforms on, so we could be identified. So we had to put our uniforms back on, and the Germans had broken through somewhere up there. But anyway, we had to go to another place to cross, and it was over this big river. It had the Remagen Bridge there, the Megan Ridge River, and so we was up there waiting to get across that thing so we could get over there and go to work, and they crossed us on a bridge, and come to find out that the Americans had taken that bridge just easy, just overrun it. They had guys back there guarding it, but they just overran them, and that was my first view of dead soldiers, and they was just everywhere around there, Germans, and there was a few Americans killed there, but they had been picked up by the Americans, and the quartermaster taking care of them. But anyway, I was looking around, and I got to notice that a lot of them had a finger missing. And I talked to one of the guys that had been over there, one of the soldiers that we were replacing, and they said, well, we're going to leave you all here to guard this bridge. Says it probably won't be any trouble here at all because we got them on a run, we got them running. Says, we're going to leave you guys here. And I asked this guy, I says, well, how did these guys get so many fingers shot off? Always the same finger. He laughed, he says, don't you know? I said, no, I don't know. He says, Americans cutting them fingers off. They're cutting them off for a ring they're wearing. Now, Americans was doing that. We're the humane bunch, you know. Here we were cutting their fingers off to get a gold ring or diamond ring or whatever they had on. Good night. Just made me sick. But anyway, we dug foxholes. They had some there, and we dug them deeper. We didn't know what to expect. And just a little bit after dark, here this plane come over. Boy, he was going. And we got in these foxholes and dug down, and they dropped a bomb trying to blow that bridge so we couldn't cross, you know. The Germans already withdrawn across. And this was one of the biggest battles, one of the most important battles in that Battle of the Bulge was the Remagen bridgehead. But anyway, we didn't fire a shot there. But this plane come over, and he come over so fast we didn't have a chance to shoot at him. Time we got in them foxholes, and we was right on the top, we just jumped over in them, you know, and dug down. And this guy raised up and says, hey, Sarge, did you see that plane? He didn't have a propeller. I said, what are you talking about? It didn't have a propeller. How do you think he flew? He says, I swear to it. He says, he didn't have a propeller. I says, man, he probably had two. He's going so fast you couldn't see him. That guy was moving faster than any airplane I'd ever seen fly. And he says, well, he didn't have a propeller. About that time, I hear coming out of it. And you don't hear them till they're over you, you know, them jets. He was right low down too. And he come over and he dropped the bomb, and he missed it. Oh, 150 yards. He dropped it, and he's going so fast it lit it way out there, you know. But anyway, that guy says, Sarge, you see that plane? I says, yes, I did. And he didn't have a propeller either. So I got on the phone, cranked up 9th headquarters, and told them, I said, you told us to report anything that we thought was unusual, especially about airplanes or armament. I said, there's 2 planes come over here that didn't have propellers. He says, that's what we've been wanting to find out, where those jets are. I said, what are they? He says, jets. I said, I don't know what they are, but they can really travel. He says, yeah, we know. But that was my first jet to see.
Dachau?
Dachau. Yeah, that was a pitiful sight. Those guys were, what was alive was just skin and bones, literally. All their hair had fallen out if they had any, if they had, it all was just little hanging down over their ears, maybe on the nape of their neck. And they was, oh, they were so sad. They were so sad. And they had some women guards there, big old heavy set German women, had on their German uniforms, and boy, they meant business too. When they hollered at those prisoners, they jumped. And they had 2 or 3 of them on the fence, the electric fences. They had been. We had their power knocked out. But they left them on the fence for those guys could see what they'd happen if they tried to break through, you know. They just let them hang up there, and they just cooked on her. And it is sad. And there was, I believe it was 6 cars. Now, I'm not for sure whether it was 5 or 6 now, but I was trying to think. I was talking to Dorothy about it. I mean, Sis about it. But there's 5 or 6 railroad cars, which was much shorter than ours. They're small cars, and the gauge was narrow too, that had tracks come right into the Dachau prison. And they were all loaded with bodies. They'd brought them in there to this big crematorium to burn. They were all dead. And they were stacked head to foot, naked. Smelled to high heaven. They would begin to deteriorate pretty bad. And there they were laying there, you know, dead, of course, and waiting to be burned, which they never were, because we had them buried, but made the Germans bury them. We made them carry them out of them, and our outfit were the ones who made them do that. Made them literally carry those things out there, 2 men to a body, and dump them in this hole where we had a bulldozer to dig a trench for them. They were buried in a mass grave. But these tracks led right down to the crematorium, where all they had to do was unload them into the furnace. But they had no fuel. We had them all shut off, you know. But they'd send those guys, they had a place there. I looked them over pretty good too. And then there was even some guys in there dead. They had some shower houses there, where they'd send them in to take a shower. And they go in there and turn on the water, and that was automatic gas, would gas them right there just that quick. It was cyanide. And they said they'd die instantly. Said 1 whiff and they was down. But anyway, we seen guys in that, you know. And we went over into the headquarter business and arrested all of those officers. And there's a big old German officer there, and she thought she was running that thing, I think. She had a little Fourth Derby camera on her, and I didn't have a camera, so I just took her camera. And I took pictures of Dachau, and everything after that, which wasn't too long till it was over, but I took a lot of pictures over there with that little Fourth Derby. And after I got it back, well, I took a lot of pictures, used it for 2 or 3 years after I got back. Then I got a 35mm camera. It was a 127 size of it. You know what they are. But that old gal hated to give up her. That's mine. That's my personal camera. I says, it was yours. It isn't yours anymore. I says, you're going to wind up down there in that crematorium if we ever get it going. Well, I scared the pants off of her. I didn't like Patton because ever so often he was trying to make himself visible on all fronts. Now, he was actually in the 3rd Army, and he would cross the 7th Army, he'd cross the French 1st Army, and go over into the next army, which was what? I've forgotten what it was. Oh, it was American first. But anyway, why, he'd take a bunch of his tanks and he'd light out. And he'd come through our outfit every time. He had to get through us because we was right behind the cannons, you know. And he'd be out of their way. And he'd come through and he'd take all of our gasoline, all of our food, everything. And he'd say, I got you more supplies coming. They'll be up within 2 days. And they always were, but the idea of taking them. What if we'd had to retreat? You know what I mean? Which they did once in a while. We didn't have to once we got them on a run at the Bulge. We went right on in. But I don't know. I didn't like his method at all. And he was a guy, too, that he wanted everybody to know that he was in charge. He wore 45 pistols, which wasn't regulation. He did, pearl handled at that. He'd come through, boys, strutting that old pistol. I don't know if he knew how to pull the trigger or not, but probably did. He was a good military man, but that's all he was good for in the world, was military. He couldn't make a living outside. But anyway, we was on our way over there, and Germany capitulated, and there were soldiers by the hundred out on these roads, trails, anywhere they could get where they could be found. They was out there with white rags tied on the muzzle of their gun, or bayonets if they had bayonets. Very few soldiers used bayonets ever. But anyway, they'd tie a white flag on there and flag you down. They was wanting to surrender, see. They didn't want the Russians to get them. And they knew what the Russians would do to them. They'd line them up and shoot them. And we had a big pen down there. Here again, I don't remember how many acres it was, but it was acres and acres and acres that was fenced off that we were keeping prisoners in. And they was just soldiers out there by the hundreds, thousands. And we'd captured them. And all this bunch wanting to give up. And this guy, they were so thick on the road we had to drive real slow. And I was in the seat next to the driver. In fact, it's my Jeep we was in. And I was in the off seat. And this officer was in the back seat of this Jeep, which sits a little bit higher than the seats do, you know. It wasn't actually a seat, it's just a little, you've seen them bench-like thing. But anyway, halfway seat. But anyway, we was going along, and Wall was this guy's name, Lieutenant Wall. He was a good guy and everything but that. He hated them Germans. And he was a German himself, W-A-H-L. And he was a German Jew. But anyway, he was sitting back there, and he had this carbine, and which was GI to us, government issue. We didn't have long rifles to shoot with the Garand semi-automatic or anything like that. And I carried a captured German 7mm all through the war. First one of them I get my hands on, I got that and got me several boxes of ammunition, put them in my Jeep, and I had that all the time to use. But anyway, and I use it quite a little bit for this, that, and the other. Use it on that machine gun nest. And I killed several deer over there. Would take over to these prisoner camps and give it to the prisoners, you know. And they got where they'd see my Jeep coming, boy, they'd come down there to me, and they'd have that deer off that thing before we could say hello, and have it skinned. Boy, they wanted some meat. They're starving to death, you know, just living on bare rations, bread and water, cabbage soup. But anyway, they was glad to get them. But old Wall, he was sitting back there, you know, cussing these Germans out, holding up traffic and everything. And this guy come up, he was just determined to give himself up. And he's right beside me, and hollering, I can't say it like he did, but please prisoner, in English, he said, trying to. And old Wall took his gun butt and hit him right in the back of the head and just dropped his brains out the back of his skull. They just literally fell out. Made me so mad I couldn't see straight. Boy, I turned around and I pointed my finger at it. I believe it was as big as old Sheriff Malmright's. I pointed my finger at him and I said, Lieutenant, if you ever do that again, I'll shoot you. And I mean it. And he says, he looked at me and he says, I believe you would, wouldn't you? And I said, yes, I would. He says, well, he's a German prisoner. I said, that's the trouble. He was a prisoner. He was surrendered, already waved his flag to you, and told you in English, he's a prisoner, please. He says, yeah, I shouldn't have done it. And I don't know how many times Wall apologized to me for that, but a lot of times he knew I'd shoot him. Boy, I was mad. I don't. That's the maddest I was during the war, except that night when we landed out there in that turnip patch. Boy, I was mad that night. Whew. And I don't know what I was mad at. Just the war in general. What am I doing over here? I don't know these guys. I'm over here supposed to shoot them. You know what I mean? It just didn't make sense to me. You know, that was one of the easiest men in the Army I had to talk to, was General Eisenhower. And you'd think he'd be hard to talk to. But he called me in after VE Day. He called me in his office and gave me a choice of going to the French Riviera or England for a 5-day rest period, he called it. And I told him if it was all the same to him, I'd rather go on that truck that went to Belgium to pick up coal and swing around through the places where we had been and see what they looked like after we'd been through them. He says, well, that's just fine. You just go. So that's what I did. But old Eisenhower was so nice to talk to. And he told me, he says, I know you're just a sergeant. I was a master sergeant at the time, replaced an officer. He says, but you're doing officer's work. Says, according to regulations, we can't give you a battlefield commission because you haven't been in the field 90 days in the battlefield. And I said, I don't care. I don't want to be officer anyway. I didn't tell him why. I didn't want to be a bunch of snobs. But anyway, he was so easy to talk to. He says, I sure want to thank you for the work you've done for us. Says, you come over here, took over that other battalion's job. Says, just everything worked out fine. Says, everything would, in fact, seemed like better. Of course, it's in the war, you know, mopped up. And I was in on that part of it. Got the credit. They dropped the atom bomb. They shattered the windows down there in Fort Hancock from White Sands, New Mexico. Boy, they rattled us. What in the world is that? Good night, that was loud. Nobody knew. Then it come on the radio that the U.S. Army had dropped a test bomb, atom bomb. We didn't know what atom bomb was, but we thought, oh, whatever it is, drop some over there. And sure enough, they did before my time to go over was up. Well, they dropped those bombs, and we didn't have to go. And went on out. And later, they dropped the A bomb while I was home, and I didn't have to go to Japan. So they called me up and asked me if I would take over the New Mexico, Arizona, and West Texas division of the Army. It had a certain number, I forgot what it is now. There's a section for Army recruiting and stuff like that. Said, will you take over that area for recruiting? And says, that way you'll get to be home. Yeah, you bet. So I took that. And a few days later, I got another call from the Army, from the Adjutant General, saying, report to Fort Bliss at once for your instructions. You're to be a ski instructor in Fort Collins, Colorado. And says, if there's any reason why you can't make this, contact the Adjutant General in person at once. So boy, I went out to Fort Bliss right then. I went out there. They had set me up an office there in the Capels building in El Paso on the 5th floor, and I had 2 stenographers and 4 recruiters working for me out of that office. But boy, I hightailed it out there at the post. I went in to see the Adjutant General. You don't just walk in and see the Adjutant General. Says, well, what makes you think you can see him without a written order? I said, I got a written order, and I showed him that letter I had to report to him at once for assignment to Fort Collins. So they took me in there, and that old guy, he just laughed like everything. I told him, I says, General, I've never been on a pair of skis in my life. I hadn't, I still haven't. He says, well, they read your resume when you come in the Army, where you had worked all over all the mountains out west, Mount Whitney and all them mountains, and they just figured you was a skier. So we need some instructors up there, so they picked you. So we'll just avoid this right now. So I didn't have to go up there. I started recruiting there, you know, and I stayed in recruiting till I retired.